Part 2 of the Thursday, 28th January lecture. So, the jobs were done by slaves, which are cheaper than free workers. Free workers require a regular salary or wage. Free workers require time off. You have to treat free workers with a degree of respect, and you have to accept that free workers are going to come and go. They're going to come, want to get hired, work with you for a while, and then maybe they quit, go on to another job. Maybe you have to fire them. You don't have to do any of that with slaves. You buy them, they're yours. You feed them whatever you want to feed them. You let them sleep in the corner or in the basement or in the supply room or whatever. And you don't care what they think. Because if you don't like what they're doing, you can torture or kill them. They're tools. Legally, they're tools. The state religions of Rome and its pagan enemies viewed them as tools. Their humanity is gone. And Romans had a contempt for their slaves because a Roman would say to themselves, I would never be a slave. I would rather die than be a slave. My slaves can put up with me and my way of treating them, or they can leave this life. All they have to do is kill themselves, and they're gone. So Romans viewed their slaves with a degree of contempt because, and if the fan bothers you, feel free to move, because if the slave had any self-respect, as a Roman would see it, the slave would end their own life, choosing death rather than slavery. So it's not just that the Romans didn't think that the slaves were people anymore. They thought that the slaves were terribly cowardly people. And therefore, fine, you want to live as my slave, then you're my slave. I'm going to treat you like one. You're a tool. Get used to it. If you don't like it, bye. That's your way out. So suddenly, a Roman society that had been oriented towards work became one oriented towards luxury. A society that had had free working men suddenly became a society where slaves did the work. And so poor working men didn't have a purpose anymore. They didn't have a job. So what are they going to do? How are they going to survive? Well, as the Republic moves on past the time of the Punic Wars, more and more of them become members of the urban poor, the Roman mob, the proletariat. They don't have work anymore. So they become the clients of wealthy men who will take care of them and their families in return for total, unlimited, absolute loyalty. Now, these men are still free, theoretically. They can vote, but their real freedom is gone, taken up in their agreement to be the client of this other person, to do what this other person wants them to do. If you're under that kind of an obligation, are you free? I don't know if anyone could argue. Can any of you argue that they're still free as members of the proletariat, as clients? Seriously, I'd like to hear the argument if you want to make it. Okay. Yes.
I think there's something that separates them from being slaves, and it's that it's rare, but if they do find a job, they can get out of it.
Maybe. Depends on the agreement. But yes, you're right.
Well, in the case of Sextus, he can get out of it.
Yeah, because his patron would have released him at that point. That's true. Had Sextus found a job. But yes, that's true. Yes.
I guess, originally he did have a choice. He could probably starve to death on the streets, but he would still be free.
That's the very Roman choice. The Romans were not like Japanese. The Japanese are largely unique among human societies that suicide for them is a big part of their culture. When Yoda says to Luke, do or do not, there is no try, That comes from the samurai notion, the Japanese notion, the Japanese knightly notion, that whatever you say you're going to do, you either do or you die. If you are a samurai serving a daimyo, if you're a knight serving a Japanese lord, and that lord dies in battle, you failed. Your job was to defend and protect and fight for your lord, and you let your lord get killed. So you go down and you commit seppuku, which is a slow form of ritual suicide, and that's how you gain your honor back. That's how you go into the next life. If you don't do that, then you're Ronin, which is a masterless samurai, which is a disgraced person. The Japanese are still, to this day, more oriented towards suicide as an option to deal with dishonor in life than anyone else. Some idiot American who was living in Japan, and I mean a true scum, made a video making light of a forest which typically was a place where people went to commit suicide. And he was making jokes. That person is lucky he didn't get beaten to death by a Japanese crowd. What he did was awful. Really bad. And I think they expelled him for it. I think he's back here somewhere in the United States. And he's a genuine scumbucket. You don't do that. You don't make fun of people in a way that their families can see who commit suicide. It's just awful. But he did. Every year in Japan, young people just like yourselves, full of promise, kill themselves in the late winter, early spring. Why? Because every year the best students in Japan apply for admission to Tokyo University. Tokyo University is Japan's version of Yale, Harvard, Brown, Princeton, all the Ivy League schools rolled up into one. That's Tokyo U. It's the best school in the country. And the best students in each high school they try to get in. Many of them who don't kill themselves because they think that they've dishonored themselves and their families and their ancestors. And the only way out to preserve their honor is seppuku or harikiri, ritual suicide. Now that is not our way. And many Japanese don't do that, but some do every year. From our standpoint, that's such a terrible waste. No, fine, you didn't get into the Ivy Leagues. Big deal! You'll be the top student at the second-tier college. You'll still have a good life. But there is a brittle strength and weakness. It's both from a Western point of view in Japanese society that says the way out of dishonorable situations is to end yourself. Well, the Romans had a bit of that. They did. And Romans would often, if they were considered, if a Roman, this is under the empire, were to betray the emperor, the poor guys would all get killed. But if a rich guy betrayed the emperor, a rich and powerful guy from a rich and powerful family, he'd be offered the opportunity to take a bath and open his veins. And if he did that, or if he fell on his sword, which is another Roman way of doing it, his family would be taken care of. If he didn't do that within a certain period of time, then he would be arrested, his family would be disgraced, enslaved, and it would just be bad. So most Romans, faced with that choice, if they were wealthy enough to even be offered it in the first place, were willing to kill themselves and preserve their families. This is some dark stuff. But a person, especially a man in those days, who can't find a job, who can't support his family, that's serious. That is so serious. And that's what Rome was facing. It was facing a crisis because there was this apparently endlessly growing supply of plebeians who can't find work, and so they become semi-slaves, semi-free to their patrons, or they're just desperately on the street begging for coins, willing to do anything. Crime goes up, corruption goes up. It's awful. And it's under these pressures that the optimates and the populares disagree. The optimates say the system works. Those people should go out to the colonies and start new. They don't have to stay in Rome. They could go out to Gaul or go out to Iberia. Iberia is a frontier. They're finding gems, gold, and silver there every day, or copper, even copper. It's a good metal to find. You can sell it. You dig it out of the ground, you sell it, you make yourself some money. The optimates say that the proletarians, all they have to do is go out to the empire, and they'll be fine. And those young men who are proletarians, stay in the legions. The populares, on the other hand, who primarily represent the interests of the plebeians, say, no, you can't expect somebody who has no money on the street to buy a ship ticket or pay the expenses of travel to get all the way to Iberia. That's crazy talk. They're stuck. We've got to help them. So do you see some very superficial comparisons between progressives and conservatives, between liberals and libertarians, between Democrats and Republicans in these two parties? The optimates are sort of like the Republicans in that they say the system is not broken, people need to take individual responsibility. Whereas the populares say the system is broken, good people are being trapped in poverty, we need to help them. Is anyone unclear about that? Does anyone think that that's an unfair comparison? Because, again, we can talk about it if you do. I see no hands. Okay. So, two populare politicians, brothers, Tiberius Gracchus and later his brother Gaius Gracchus, rise to prominence as tribunes of the plebs. They have the power of veto, they have the power of it being inviolate, nobody can touch them. And they propose land reform. Land reform is, what we're going to do is we're going to set a maximum number of acres for anyone to own. And you can own up to that maximum number of acres, and it's a lot. And you'll be rich and comfortable and powerful and all of that. But beyond that maximum number of acres, no one is going to be allowed to own. That extra acreage, will be confiscated and divided into family farm plots and will be loaned out to members of the proletariat so they can become family farmers again, so that they can become plebeians again. And they'll pay their loan back to the government and they'll be landowners again. And the proletariat will be gone and the social problems will be solved and all will be right with the world. That's the populare position. That's the position of Tiberius Gracchus and later his brother Gaius. However, as I tried to point out last time, the optimates rightly point out that a government that is powerful enough to take their property against their will is a government powerful enough to make them all into slaves. They acquired their land legally. They bought it. And the amount of money that the government is paying per acre is an insult. No, we will not comply. We will not agree. Whatever you think you're going to solve socially, you cannot solve a problem of a lack of property of some by stealing the property of others. You cannot pirate and plunder the rich in order to eliminate poverty. It won't work. And anyone who tries and is willing to use force to do that is a tyrant that needs to be opposed. Are we a republic or are we not? Are we a country of laws or are we a country where people can override the law in the name of their good intentions? So there's an impasse. The optimates are standing against the populares' land reform. The populares are insisting that land reform is the only solution to the problems of Rome, with particularly the proletariat. And now we come to a tipping point. Before I go on, this subject, the fall of the Roman Republic, is usually taught by teachers of very wise, knowledgeable, good-intentioned teachers as if evil, wealthy men stole the freedom of Rome. That's not the case. Yes, there were men, they wanted to take power, and they took power. They could not have done it without the cooperation of the vast majority of Rome's civil population. The truth of this is, and this is the scary thing for us, because we are Rome's grandson or granddaughter. American Republic is the grandson or granddaughter of the Roman Republic. If your grandparents have problems with cancer, that's in your genetics. You may have those problems yourself someday. If your grandparents have weak eyesight, you may have weak eyesight. If they have heart disease, you may have heart disease. There are certain illnesses and weaknesses that are carried genetically from one generation to the other. What happened and what we may be genetically susceptible to because we are the cultural descendants of Rome. The Roman people gave up their freedom. They gave it away in return for security. The Roman people stopped making choices because it was too hard. They gave all the power to a big heroic man on horseback who would be their sugar daddy and take care of them. They stopped being adults and they reverted to being children or teenagers. That's the truth of it. Marius, Sulla, Pompey, Crassus, Caesar, Antony, Octavian, who becomes Augustus. Yeah, they were being aggressive. They were trying to get more power. But ultimately, it took the people of Rome being willing to give those dictators and emperors the power in order for the empire to be born. The Roman people had been free for twice as long as the American Republic has existed. If people who have 500 years of history of freedom can just decide suddenly just to heck with it, it's not worth it, and leave it on the ground for some dictator to take, that should scare the heck out of you because we are Romans. We are Romans. Children, grandchildren, we are their descendants. Alarming, isn't it?
Yes.
If Romans, free men and women, gave up on their freedom because freedom is just too difficult, the burden of citizenship is just too heavy to bear. They want to be taken care of. They don't want to take care of themselves. If they can do that, so can we. Every free society, without exception, is an ongoing experiment. I've said this before and I'll say it again. The experiment is, will the coming generation accept the burdens of citizenship and carry those burdens responsibly? Or will the current generation throw their hands up in the air and say, it's too hard for me, help me, Big Daddy, and expect some dictator or ruling party or ideology to come in and take care of them? Either people are worthy of their freedom and they do their best and they are responsible, or people lose that worthiness because they no longer care enough to try. They give up. It has happened before, it will happen again, and it could very easily happen to us. It could happen in your lifetime or in mine because it's an ongoing question. Will enough people carry the burdens of adulthood, the burdens of real citizenship in a free society? Will people care enough to work at being a citizen? Or will they expect to be taken care of? And only time will tell. So as you hear this story going forward, think about the question, how and why did Romans give up on freedom? Almost as if there might be an essay about that at some point in your future. But even if there isn't, this is the value of this story. Learn why and how Romans gave up on their freedom. Because it could happen to you. It could happen around you. You might even participate in it. I hope not. So here's the turning point. From a republic that's in trouble to a republic that's in decline. It's not the last time Rome could have turned around, but this is the first real step away from freedom. Yes?
Are we allowed to at least put in an early idea for why?
Sure.
Because I think it was due to the fact that most of it was because the poor people didn't have a chance to really get a job and continue living on their life. So it was just a really big burden they had to continue carrying.
Yeah.
And it just became too much in the end.
That's a part of it. If you're starving on the streets, you're desperate. Desperate people don't make good citizens. They don't. Communism has never taken over a wealthy, prosperous society. It's never even taken over an industrial society. Even though communism's theory says, oh, we're going to take over industrial societies and people will choose revolution. No, prosperous people never choose communism. Desperate, starving people choose communism. And communism has always won in backwards agrarian cultures and countries like Russia, like China, like North Vietnam, like North Korea, like Cuba. It is not a philosophy of wealthy, successful people. It's a philosophy of the desperate. So is fascism. So is National Socialism. These revolutions don't happen in peaceful, happy, prosperous societies. They happen when people are desperate. So yes, the desperation of the poor is certainly part of it. Yes?
I just like on the subject of like the whatever.
Yep.
I feel like I see like sides of both, but like I would probably like side popular just because I think I wouldn't do like what they're doing with the land, but I would find another way to do it. But it's just because that the optimates or whatever they're not like. They're not arguing on the fact that they like, well, it's just the right thing to do not to take my land. They're doing it because they're selfish and that they're not selfish, but they're
They're kind of selfish.
yeah, they're selfish and they're way too used to their like what did you describe it as?
Well, they're way being given.
They're like wealthy, like
yeah. Powerful. They're
there's like a word for it, like a lustful lifestyle.
Decadence or
yeah. Yeah, there's a word for it.
There is. I'm sure we'll think of it once we're done.
Lush lifestyle, but
yes.
So they don't want to like. They even if they wouldn't lose it, their life wouldn't change that much. But they're so fed.
Luxuriant, I think.
They're so they love their luxurious life so much that giving up even a little bit of it to help like someone who's literally starving.
That is the way the Popolari saw it. You made a very good case for their side.
And it's like if you give a little bit to help, like a fraction of their wealth could help like 20 other Roman families. Like,
do you know what the optimates would say to that? And unless somebody else wants to take up their side of the argument, which would be fine. No, you did an excellent job of arguing the Gracchi's position. Yes.
Also, due to the fact that the optimists have like all the wealth, like she said, that I doubt they would really be able to see or understand what the populares have to deal with. And also because even if someone was once part of that, sort of in the poor area, there's the possibility that they could have just gotten so much that they forgot how that was.
Yeah. You both make the populare case. Yeah. Here's the optimates case. If you want to encourage me to charitably give away some of my land to try to do this, then give me the choice. Let me volunteer. But if you force me, if you try to compel me, then I won't. It's the difference between asking a free person to give a little bit and accepting whether they say yes or no, and saying you will give or we will take. That's the difference. Yeah. And I don't see it as immoral. I see it as selfish, but selfishness is a human trait. Without selfishness, we die. Oh God, I'm disagreeing with every mother of a 3-year-old. Because caring is sharing. No, without selfishness, we die. That is a moral point. It's not just about greed.
Yeah. But like also the quick one they were like, well, maybe if they got jobs, maybe if they worked harder, it's like. They can't get jobs because you guys don't offer them any because you're not. They're like first of all, the optimates are not contributing to the economy because there is no economy because they're using slaves for labor, and that's the only thing. That's 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 where all the jobs are going. So when they're saying, "Oh, well, why not just get a job?" There are no jobs because you guys aren't providing any. So maybe like they don't have to like give up money. Maybe they could just stop using so much slave labor and give some population jobs. You don't have to give up your money. You just have to give a few people some jobs.
It's the words "have to" that are key.
Yeah.
By the way, you definitely need to take speech and debate if you haven't.
Oh,
No, you're a good speaker. You're a passionate speaker, and you're a thoughtful speaker. That was very well done. I'm not being condescending. I am not trying in any way. I'm telling you, that's a talent. Consider developing. Seriously. Yes.
Do you think that like a smart, instead of forcing them to take away land, they instead put like a max cap on the amount of slaves you can have in your business?
It's the same thing. Slaves are property. Whether it's an acre of land or a dozen slaves, it's still property I acquire legally. Now,
It's not
what they might have done, but again, the proletariat are a clear and present danger right now. We could argue what they might have done is said, okay, no future land acquisition can be over such and such an amount. But at that point, you still have to question, does the government really have the power to decide how much is enough for me? And if the government has that power, what else can they do? Your reasonable point is trumped by their strongly held extremist positions. The truth is, there were other answers than land reform, but what the populares insist on is land reform. The optimates insist that land reform is theft, and basically they're stuck in a Manichaean argument, a black and white argument, an argument where there's no compromise, and that's one of the things that breaks the republic. And we got to talk about that. So I'll give you 5 seconds. I'll give you 5 seconds if you want, but we got to move on.
Turning the opposite side and the holding up about anecdotes, some of them just didn't have the choice. Otherwise, they would end up losing something
Right.
that they needed.
Yeah. And again, who owns what I own, me or the government? And if the government owns it, then do I own anything at all? It's a question that goes to the root of property. Yes.
Yeah, I was about to say that obviously if there's no restrictions, then there eventually one of these offspring could own the entirety of Rome.
Mm-hmm.
But like that would go into a ton of stuff. So that's it.
Thank you for the conversation. Tiberius Gracchus, tribune of the plebs, goes to the forum and begins making a speech advocating land reform. There's a crowd. This isn't the first time he's done it. People know what he's going to do, but he's a good speaker, so the crowd gathers around him. He's standing on a little raised podium. The crowd is cheering. Suddenly, something happens, and members of the crowd attack a tribune doing his tribunican duty, and they kill him to death. That's a scientific term. They kill him to death. Now, it starts a riot. But after the fact, it becomes clear that members of the crowd included prominent bully boy clients of powerful Optimate senators. Now, what happened? Clearly what happens is that Optimate senators saw Tiberius Gracchus, his charisma, his ability to persuade people as a threat, and they decided to eliminate the threat by creating an incident where an anonymous mob just happens to kill a tribune, which is a death penalty offense, and it's an attack on the sacred nature of Rome's system and Rome's republic and Rome's gods. Yes?
Was the tribune that died Gracchus, or was it just some other?
It was Tiberius Gracchus. He's dead. Killed to death. Beaten and stabbed. Killed to death by this crowd. Now, this is a scandal. This is huge. Huge, I tells you. No one is convicted of this crime. There are a few clients that are suspected, but because of the confusing nature of the riotous mob, no one knows exactly what happened. There are too many conflicting reports, some of whom were told by the clients of the Optimate senators. So what has happened is that a tribune of the plebs, which is a sacred office, was murdered by his political opponents, obviously. But since no one can prove it, no one gets punished. We have gotten away with assassination. Now, the political environment changes. Because if you can't win by persuasion, you can win by assassination. A precedent is set. You want to understand why people were angry and are angry about the election. You want to understand why some people may have rioted. I will tell you. The evidence about the security of this election is highly suspect. Have people proven that it was stolen? No, absolutely not. Because many states would not explore the issue. They simply closed ranks and said, it's legitimate. We don't find evidence. But in no case, none, did they do a proper audit. What that means is that I and many people who, like me, voted for Trump are not looking at Joe Biden like we looked at Barack Obama or Bill Clinton or Jimmy Carter as Democrats who won an election, stinks to be us, will wait 4 years. We look at Biden and Harris as people who may have had the election stolen for them. And until the election is investigated seriously, without people defensively saying, there's nothing to see here, move along, shut up, don't talk about the election not being legitimate. Without that, the doubt that people like me feel will make it impossible for us to view Biden as a real president. Just as 4 years ago, and I will call on you, just as 4 years ago, those people who thought that Hillary Clinton had the election stolen had difficulty accepting Donald Trump as their president. But 4 years ago, people did not tell Hillary supporters to shut up. They didn't get censored on Facebook or Instagram. They were allowed to speak. So it's a step that you don't want to take. You don't want to have elections that are not secure because people won't necessarily trust the results. Yes?
I was gonna say that isn't that essentially what happened about 4 years ago with the whole Hillary and Trump?
Not necessarily, and here's why. 4 years ago, Hillary didn't question whether the voting was secure. Because 4 years ago, we didn't mail out ballots in some states by the thousands when nobody requested them. That is not something that would have been considered secure before the age of COVID. Hillary thought that the Russians meddled and released a bunch of information embarrassing to her, and at the last minute caused voters to change their mind, that they were duped by Russia. That's what basically Hillary's argument was. But she never questioned that there were more votes, more states voting for Trump than voted for her. The difference this time isn't just that it's my guy that lost. The difference this time is that the very structure of one person, one vote is called into question when you blanketly mail ballots out to thousands of people who may not still live there, who may not be alive, but whose neighbors might get a hold of it and falsify their information. And falsified voting might have turned the election. We don't know. If I were a Democrat, would rather have the investigations, even if they took a while. Biden's still going to be president in the meantime. But I would rather have the investigations so that the question of whether the election was sincere and legitimate or not was answered. I can live with a Biden presidency. I'm not thrilled, but I can live with it if it's real. But the thought of an election being successfully stolen deeply bothers me, and it deeply bothers other people. Does that mean I want to riot and attack Congress? No. It means I can't give Biden the respect that any new president deserves, that Trump deserved 4 years ago. I can't do it. Not fully, because I'm not sure he's really the guy. I don't know if that makes any sense. You don't have to agree with me. I don't expect anyone who doesn't think that there was election fraud to suddenly go, ooh, there may have been. No, I'm telling you why I and people like me doubt. And there's a reason. All right.
Uh, I, I don't like Trump like at all, but I would rather the election be investigated, get it over with. No, I feel like it's a lot of problems, like a lot of disrupt, I guess, and like investigated earlier. And I hope it isn't true, but like if it
I hope it isn't true either. I really do.
I hope it isn't true, but I'm sorry, I have a cold.
That's fine.
Um,
Glad you're here at school with the cold.
yeah.
I'm joking.
But I hope it isn't true. But like, if you feel like could have done it earlier instead of like,
It would have been nice.
it would have been nice in that right.
Didn't happen. Hopefully at some point there will be. There may never be. That's also a possible. Now, since this current event issue was raised by me and I offered my opinion, some people have offered theirs, I invite any of you to offer your thoughts on this before we go on into the Roman stuff. If you have thoughts, if you have opinions. Yes?
What would happen if the election was approved?
If it was demonstrably stolen, what would happen is that, first of all, Biden-Harris might resign, and the election results could be reversed. Trump would take the oath of office, and things would go on. That's the best case scenario. What would probably happen is at that point, we'd be in a constitutional crisis, especially if Biden, and again, this is only if it was proven, which, again, I hope it wasn't stolen. But if it's proven that it was stolen, and Biden refused to accept that, at that point, we deal with a constitutional crisis. The House and the Senate and the Supreme Court would have to come together and find in the Constitution a solution. And there are various ways to go at that point. That would not be great for the Republic. It's also not great for the Republic to have 70-odd million people doubting the validity of an election in a country of just over 300 million. So we'll see what happens. I am hopeful that good things will happen. I am hopeful of all sorts of things, but you never know. It's just as a citizen in the Republic, does this not make you want to go, Dah! Does the division in our society not make you occasionally want to bang your head against a cement wall? Makes me want to do that. I don't, because I don't have any hair to protect myself, but it is one of those things every so often I want to do, because it's crazy making. It's the conversation in this country is so poisoned. Now you know why people gave up on freedom. The Roman people got so sick of it that they just said, to heck with it. Let's get taken care of by a dictator or an emperor. We'll call him whatever. Just as long as we don't have to deal with this anymore. And the fact that they did that still scares me. I would rather deal with a messy republic than a well-run dictatorship. But that's me. Any other thoughts? Okay, let's just see if there's anyone else. Nope. Yes.
I think it would be easy for anyone on an opposite side to say that everyone's upset about this whole thing and is making these accusations because Trump lost. But I think it's also it's mainly out of the concern for how the whole thing got run to begin with. Honestly, had this whole COVID thing not started, things might have been easier.
Mm-hmm. Things certainly would have been.
Blame the virus.
Yeah, and blame our reaction to it. Unfortunately, many of us allowed ourselves to be panicked in one way or another. I'm not going to go beyond that. I think it's fair to say that people on all sides got a little overexcited about the whole thing. In any event, he's killed. That's a precedent. So now we're going to use violence to settle political problems. No longer about speeches and voting. It's about who can kill whom. But there's a second chance. A few years later, his younger brother, Gaius Gracchus, becomes a tribune of the plebs. And he advocates the Gracchi position of land reform. And he goes out and makes a speech. And the crowd is cheering. And the crowd is suddenly filled with clients of Optimate senators in the front row. And then there's another riot. And Gaius Gracchus is killed to death by people in the mob. So, Strike 1, Tiberius is murdered. His murderers get away with it. Steerite 2, Gaius is murdered. Now, a couple of low-level guys are identified, and they're killed. They're the clients. The senators who ordered the assassination never get touched, never get accused by name, they're never put on trial, they get away with murder. Not once, but twice. From this moment, the Roman Republic is not a republic where elections and votes determine things. It is a place where violence is going to determine things. But still, they could have gone back. Until Gaius Marius comes along. Gaius Marius is a schlub from Puteoli. He's a Roman officer. He's a good one, but he's not a nobleman. He's a populare. And he, through his political connections, gets the most plum job in the entire Roman Empire. He becomes military governor of Iberia. At a time when more gold and more silver and more gemstones are being taken out of the ground than before or since. Marius, because he's a military dictator, takes a taste of everything. If you want a mining contract, you got to pay him off. If you want to increase the use of your mine, you got to pay him off. If you want to transport your gold, silver, or gems and not have them robbed by bandits, you got to pay him off. Marius goes to Spain, goes to Iberia as a military officer with only a certain amount of money. He comes out the richest man in the Roman world. That didn't happen by accident. Marius is now the wealthiest man in Rome, and he wants to become the first man in Rome. Then there's an invasion. There's a war with the Numidians that Rome wins, and while Rome's armies are over in North Africa, across the Alps come the Teutons, the Cimbri, a bunch of barbarians, a horde of barbarians that is going to scare everyone in Rome because they defeat a couple of Roman armies, just like Hannibal did. But these guys are interested in just rape and murder and burning and destruction. They're going to destroy Rome. Marius says, I've got a solution. And the Senate and people of Rome say, do it! So what Marius does is he offers the men of the proletariat the option of joining his new armies. He's going to buy their equipment. Traditionally, Romans buy their own gear. He's going to pay them a wage. Traditionally, Romans support themselves. He is going to be their patron as well as their general. They will be his clients as well as his soldiers. It is a private army that Marius pays for with his vast wealth. He marches north. By the way, Marius reorganizes his army so that it's the most effective army in the Roman world. They use different weapons. They use better weapons, better formations, better tactics. So suddenly imagine that Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos or even Elon Musk suddenly developed the power to have an army division, an air wing, and a navy squadron that is more powerful than any other part of the American military. That's Marius. He takes that military, destroys the Teutons, the Cimbri, the invasions, and becomes first man in Rome. Now the precedent is set. Because while the armies march under the banner Senatus Populusque Roma, or the Senate and People of Rome, SPQR, who do you think their loyalty is really owed to? It's not to the Senate, and it's not to the people of Rome. It's to their general, their patron, Gaius Marius. It's his army. That's the tipping point. We'll continue tomorrow. Spend a few minutes getting your food, but be back here within 5 or 10 minutes. Thank you.
Well, you know, eating.
Oh, and you can shut the door. Bye.